That was his message in 2011. The year 2015 was, I think, a good year. In that year, countries within the United Nations decided on the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. And later that year, we had the COP21, the climate summit in Paris, was successful. And Pope Francis wrote his encyclical with the title Laudato Si, in which he said we should consider our planet as our common home. These are positive tendencies in 2015. But already in that year, I saw articles with titles like "The end of the nation state is over. The nation state is back." And what happened afterwards? In the UK, we had Brexit, leaving the European Union. And a bit later, we had President Trump. In America, it was about America first. And then we got a time of Corona, the world was falling apart, you could feel that. And after Corona, we got the Ukraine war, the war of Russia and Ukraine. And now today, we have all the tensions in Israel and Gaza. That is what's happening in this world. It has changed completely. It's more than that. What you can see is that there are so many tensions worldwide, and you can say, yes, there are geopolitical tensions. That is what you can see everywhere. But it's more than that. Also, a country like India, I can understand it, is also busy with thinking about their position worldwide. And you see the global south, and of course, they also want to have their responsibilities. And there's also anti-Western sentiments. That's what you can see as well. So in the world, everything is changing. And that means that the question about what is globalization today is a very relevant issue. Let me go back to one of my predecessors, Professor Ruud Lubbers. He was prime minister, and of course, Simone, you know that. He was prime minister between 1982 and 1994. 1994, he stopped. And then he became professor at Tilburg University. And he was professor of globalization. That was, in fact, a positive story. People believed in globalization. In 1989, you had Francis Fukuyama. He wrote a fantastic paper with the title, The End of History. And he said, after the time of communism in Central Eastern Europe, after the time of apartheid, and regimes in South America, we will see one model, the liberal democracy. That was his view on the future of the world. That is what you can see. And people believed in advantages of globalization. And see what is happening now. We talk suddenly about geo-economic fragmentation. And what happened? When President Bush was there, President Trump was there, it was about what do we see in the world, America first. And we also saw the sanctions towards the European Union. Sanctions from China to Europe. Sometimes Europe seems to be a kind of battlefield. So many things are happening. When we had the war in Ukraine, sanctions against Russia. So the discussion about what is free trade is changing. That's what you can see everywhere. And that's also the reason why suddenly we do not talk about globalization, we talk about deglobalization or slowbalization. And I think it's a worrying situation. Because if you talk about the issues of today, climate change, natural resources, in fact, we need each other. And history has shown that it's possible to change. After the Second World War, it was the time of the end of colonialism. We got the United Nations, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Later on, we had the big issue of the hole in the ozone layer. And people said, if we want to tackle this issue, we must work together. The Millennium Development Goals were successful. And it led to a lot of success, and you could see that working together always is helpful. And at this moment, we see geopolitical tensions, a rivalry about world leadership, battle between countries, it's all there, and you see the world is falling apart when you talk about economic developments. It's worrying. And why is it worrying? Because there are so many issues at the moment that needs global cooperation. If you talk about climate change, we need each other. We live on one world. If you talk about the scarcity of natural resources, the circular economy, we need each other. If you talk about the big issue of inequality, you need each other just to find the right solutions for combating inequality. I'm concerned about Arctic melting, and we'll see that with huge consequences. If we really want to cover this issue, we must work together. And also there are maybe negative aspects of artificial intelligence, the risks. All these issues clarify you need each other. And then the question today is, do we have a global agenda? Do you think so? Do we have a global agenda? See some doubts? Who says yes, we have a global agenda? Who of you? Do we have a global agenda? Nobody? Ladies and gentlemen. you heard possibly about the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. I just mentioned them. I believe SDGs is a set of goals that has to do everything with a global agenda. Because this is about better quality of life for everyone, leave no one behind. And it's about bringing down poverty and hunger. It's about education. It's about responsible production and consumption. It's all in there. I love these SDGs because this is a set of goals that unite people, businesses, universities, and so on. And it's my conviction that we need such an agenda. We've had it in the past for the developing countries, the MDGs, Millennium Development Goals. They were successful. 70 or 80% of those goals have been realized. And now we need the SDGs. So as far as I can see at this moment, there is in fact a big gap. A gap between an inspiring global agenda, the SDGs, and these are necessary. So there is an aspiring agenda, but a gap with the geopolitical tensions and geoeconomic fragmentation. I'm concerned about this big gap. And then the question, of course, is there a way out? And it's not so easy. Because what I described, my experience as Prime Minister in 2009, was in fact the willingness to work together, to feel the common responsibility. And now you see complete different orientations. Well, is there a way out? I think this is a key question today. Let me mention 4, I think, important elements. The first is, the world does not consist only of political leaders, of protectionist tendencies, about autocrats or populists or nationalists, what you can see everywhere. The world also consists of businesses, universities, NGOs, cities, regions. So it's important also to underline those non-state actors that can be very relevant to realize the SDGs. And here's the first thing. The second point what I'd like to mention is it's always important to try to find the right solution, to be creative, have new ideas. I think this is really key. And passion. And what have we seen in history? In history, of course, we had many wars in the 19th century, the First World War, the Second World War, everything happened. But at the same moment, we've seen that in 200 years' time, life expectancy went up, quality of education was better, equal rights for men and women. It has changed. There are so many positive elements in history. And I say that this gives hope. You can see that the human mind is able to find the right solutions, and that gives hope for me. So it's about passion and finding new solutions. Another point is, the third element, of course I see all those difficult tendencies and tensions, it's true. But ask always yourself the question, see young people here, what is in the interest of next generations on our planet? You should ask constantly this question. And in fact, it's crazy what's happening in the world. It's crazy that we are busy, we have wars, etc. Whereas we see the big issues of today. So what is in the interest of next generations and our planet? I think this is really key. And last element is, sooner or later, governments, political leaders will be confronted with their common responsibilities. If you talk about Arctic melting, we have to work together. And if you talk about climate change, we have to work together. You cannot escape. And I think this is an important element just to underline the fact that we need each other. And I think also ISF, your organization, is an important player because you also can contribute to a better world. I think this is really key. And we must be honest, make the right analysis. That's my last point. I'm also a professor, I have to mention some books. I hope you agree. Well, one book is written by a Belgian political scientist, Johan Anton Holtslag. He's quite frequently here on Dutch television. And he has written a book with the title World Politics Since 1989. And the Dutch title is Van muur tot muur, From Wall to Wall. And it's a beautiful book about international politics, about foreign politics. And he's critical about China, critical about Russia, but also critical about the West. He said the West has not been able to build up a real sustainable and inclusive economy in 30 years' time. I think we need these reflections when we talk about the future of this world and this planet. Simone, this was my first point. Is it going too rapidly?
No, you're doing fine.
That's a good remark. And the time is also okay?
Perfect.
Because I'm looking there at technicians. It happened to me some time ago. I was invited to give a speech in the neighborhood of Schiphol Airport, a big business meeting, 1,000 people were there, well-organized music, nice hall, etc. And the technician put the headset on my head, put the battery on my belt and said, Mr. Balkenende, the battery will work for 20 minutes. Yeah, then that's your speaking time. Huh? It is a solution. It is a solution. And that brings me to my second block. New realities in the economy. And I will talk about discussion about capitalism and the role of the businesses. Let me ask you, is anyone of you familiar with the difference between Rhinelandic economies and Anglo-Saxon economies? Have you heard about these wordings? Yeah, no, you know it. Simone, what is it? What's the difference?
Well, the difference is that are you value-driven or money-driven?
That's in...
Very short description.
Yes, yeah, you're an excellent moderator, very sharp.
Yes.
But it's a very good point. Let me go back to the year 1992. I never forget that book. It was written by Michel Albert, a Frenchman. He was active in the insurance sector, but also a thinker. And he made an analysis. He said, it is remarkable we've had a traditional battle between communism and capitalism. And then he said, that battle is over after the end of communism in Central and Eastern Europe. And then he said, now there's a new battle between two varieties of capitalism, Anglo-Saxon capitalism and Rhinelandic capitalism. And he said, Rhinelandic capitalism means cooperation between the government and the social partners, employees and employee associations, more long-term thinking, more eye for solidarity and public facilities. That's Rhinelandic. Anglo-Saxon means more focused on the interests of shareholders, more short-term focus, profit-driven, not much eye for solidarity. And he said, in fact, Rhinelandic economies, societies, companies are superior, but people will choose for the Anglo-Saxon variety. And why? Making profit in the short run is more exciting and sexier, as he said. I had to think about that book in 2008, 2009, when we had a financial crisis. With a lot of undefinable financial products, a big crisis. It was a terrible time. And now we have a discussion about which type of economy is desirable. That's the fun. That always happens to me. I remember the time when I did my PhD in 1992. And 1 year later, I became part-time professor at Free University. And the first lecture I gave, suddenly the mobile phone went off. And then, what would the professor do? I said, give me the phone. I'll do the phone call. And then he said, yeah, it's a nice girl. Give her directly to me. So I had a nice phone call. And during the rest of the series of lectures, I never had any problem with it. That's also a solution. I mentioned the distinction between Rhinelandic and Anglo-Saxon. And since the crisis, we can see that there is a discussion about which type of economy is preferable. There is an organization that's called the Co-Roundtable for Moral Capitalism. Moral capitalism. I have to mention Adam Smith, the founder of modern economic theory, and he's well known because of his book, The Wealth of Nations, The Invisible Hand in the Economy. But for Adam Smith, the invisible hand should always be connected with moral sentiments. Because before he wrote The Wealth of Nations, he also wrote the theory of moral sentiments, moral capitalism. I met here in Rotterdam a professor from the United States, Raisi Sodia, and he has a movement that's called conscious capitalism. When you're prime minister, you have advantages and disadvantages. One of the advantages, you meet extremely interesting people in the world. So I had the honor to meet Joseph Stiglitz, the Nobel Prize winner, in New York in 2010. And he has a book written about progressive capitalism. From France, we hear people talking about responsible capitalism, inclusive capitalism. Different wordings, but in fact, it's about three main categories. One, it always should be more about long-term thinking. And the second element is, it should be really about serving all stakeholders and not only the shareholders. And stakeholders means and the clients, and the employees, and society, and the shareholders. And the third element is, you should have a better balance between economic, social, and ecological developments. This is, in fact, the main characteristics of the new views on the economy. 2 years ago, I attended a conference in Amsterdam, and there was a professor from INSEAD in France, and he also talked about the future of capitalism. He said, we should think another way. We are always used to talk in terms of output, and it should be outcome. What is the meaning of activities? And not more than only the figures, from output to outcome. He said, In economy, we also used to talk in terms of minimum means. What are the minimum means? The lesser you pay for employees, natural resources, the better. No, he said it should be about minimum harm. Fair towards your people, fair towards others in the world, fair towards the natural resources. So from minimum means to minimum harm. And the third element, he said, when we attract people, it's always about competence. What can somebody do? And he said it should be about character. And he mentioned words, care, commitment, and courage. Care, taking care for others, for society, for environment, etc. Commitment, yes, you must be acting your own role, your responsibilities. And you must show courage, because sometimes it's not easy. You have vested interests, you have all difficulties, but in any case, be clear. And I think it's an important saying that you have to clarify that it's necessary to change. I think this is a discussion you can see worldwide about the future of capitalism. And you see also lots of publications. Kate Raworth, Donut Economics. You've read the book? No? I thought, Donut Economics, what's that? And she said, I use the word donut for the traditional economic thinking, neoclassical thinking. It's always about economic growth, the demands, the demand and supply, etc. But she said, we are forgetting that outside the donut, outside the classical theory, we have issues that are called externalities, environmental damage, for example. Or inside the donut, people who feel hopeless, they have no future at all. And she says you should integrate those externalities into the main and the hardcore of the economic theory. Mariana Mazzucato, she's written a book about the value of everything. It's also somebody who's very creative. And I mentioned Joseph Stiglitz, he is writing about progressive capitalism. And he already said years and years ago, we are not measuring GDP in the right way. So I think it's important to be aware of the fact that things are changing, and we see there's a new orientation in the economy. I also can mention a recently published book that's called Capitalism Reconnected Towards a Sustainable, Inclusive and Innovative Market Economy in Europe. I can recommend it. In America, they would say this is a must-read. It's written by Govert Buys and myself. So this was the commercial. When we were writing this book, we said, it is remarkable. You can see there are new views on economic theory. What are the economic issues and what are new economic insights? We tried to describe that. And if you are busy with writing about what is happening in the economy, you cannot separate that from geopolitical realities. What about the global issues, the global tensions? What about Europe? You have to connect that. And the third one element is, if you talk about economy, be aware of what is happening with people. How's the connection between people and the state, or the NGOs, or the businesses? And we should integrate those three discussions on the basis of several values. And our values are human dignity, inclusivity, regenerativity, or circularity, and co-creation. And then we said, you need new ideals, new indicators, etc. And now we said we also need a multi-actor approach. If you want to change things, you need everything. So if you talk about new realities in the economy, it's not only a matter of think tanks, of universities. It's a matter of businesses. It's a matter of governments. It's a matter of architects or people in art. You need all actors to get a new view on the economy. And I'm happy with these orientations. And what do we see in today's world? And that's, I think, that's a second gap. There are new orientations. It is a new view on the future of capitalism. But what do we see in practice? We still are using the old definition of GDP. And when I had a meeting with Joseph Stiglitz in 2010, he said we should rethink the definition of GDP, but still there. And yes, we say it's an important thing that companies are willing to change their behavior and their views, and they should have another orientation, but it's still about short-term results. It's about the profits you make in the short run, quarterly reporting, so there's a kind of gap. Well, this general discussion is also the discussion that's valid now for the role of businesses. And that reminds me of a time when I was a student. I've studied economic and social history, but also parts of economics and political science. And my first and the second one was law. In those days, I heard about Milton Friedman, the famous economist, the Nobel Prize winner. And he once said, the business of business is business. Meaning, your actions must be in line with the rule of law. That's all okay. But in fact, it's about shareholder value, the business of business is business. That was the story. And a lot of students, economics, learned that lesson. And when I stopped as Prime Minister, it was in 2010, I had an upgrade in my life. I became partner corporate responsibility at EY, and it became partner corporate responsibility. And then I saw a document coming from the United States by Malcolm Porter, a professor from Harvard Business School, and he said, if you talk about the role of businesses today, it is about creating shared value. A company must generate and economic value and societal value. Because if you're not profitable, you cannot keep your people employed, you cannot invest in R&D, so that's clear. But at the same moment, be aware of the fact you have a societal role to fulfill. And what are you doing as a company for the big issues of today, climate change, circularity, and so on? So it's a new view, a new concept on the role of businesses, creating shared value. And this is what we see more and more. I'm happy with those developments because it's necessary. And that means you must be honest. A company must be able to tell what is the vision of our company, what are the values of our company. Once I saw, is somebody here from Japan? You don't look Japanese. Interactive. No. But you're familiar with Japan. It happened to me when I was Prime Minister. I was there with the innovation platform. And we attended a lot of companies. And what happened, in every company I was, first I had to have a look at the museum. When was the company started? Which family did they start the company? But also, what were the values of the founders of the company? And these values are still relevant today. I like that, talking about values, and that is coming back. What's the DNA of your organization? What are the values? How do you answer the why question? Why are you doing things? And that means that if you really are convinced you have to change things, you have to act another way, what do these values mean for your key performance indicators? What about life cycle analysis? How do you report about your activities? Integrated reporting, how do you measure your impact? This is all changing. And I'm happy with those developments because we see there are new realities for the companies. But it must be an honest story. When I became partner at EY, I also, together with Paul Polman and Feike Siebesma, we founded the Dutch Sustainable Growth Coalition. 8 multinationals, and we said, it's remarkable that so many Dutch companies are high on the Dow Jones Sustainability Index. Why shouldn't we join forces? And then we said, let's work together just to think about what are sustainable growth business models. How can you integrate sustainability into your business model? That was an important one. And then we said, let's think about those models. Secondly, we said we should also think about how to implement it within your organization. What about the tone at the top, ownership in your organization, remuneration systems, transparency? And then afterwards we said we should also ask ourselves the question, how can we as companies contribute to SDGs, climate change, and the circular economy? I think it was a very interesting experiment to do, and we are still existing. And why it's so important? Because you learn from each other. You can say for AkzoNobel, they were producing coatings. You can say we produce coatings, we make profit, that's our business. But you also can say, no, our coatings can keep out partly the heat of the sun so that you need less energy for ecosystems. Or you have coatings for ships, that you can have the same speed with a lesser amount of energy, just because of the quality of the coatings. You know the Philips company, now they sold the light division, but traditionally Philips sold bulbs. So you're selling light as a product. And now Signify is selling light as a service. That means that Signify stays the owner of the equipment, so you can reuse materials. Paul Polman, he said we should do everything to reduce the use of water by informing your clients. I can give many examples. It is possible to change the things, but you must have the willingness to work together and to be creative. This is a bit the world in which we're living. Is it easy? No, it's not easy. But I think it's really necessary to think about what can be done another way. And I have to mention some books. I can recommend Paul Polman, Net Positive. It's a very good book. I know Paul very well. And if you want to have a real thick book, 1,000 pages, then you should Professor Rob van Tulder here from Boston University. And that is a book about the principle of sustainable business, frameworks on corporate action for the SDGs. Brilliant book, but it's a bit long. But in any case, you have enough pages to read. And then my last example. I attended a company, and I was invited to give a speech over there, but also want to learn about their experiences. So my question was, and I noticed they were busy with sustainability. I said, what is the strategy of your company? Was the title. And the title was Serve to Win. And I thought this is interesting, because when I became partner at EY, I met Americans. They said, you've been Prime Minister, what you do now? I'm partner corporate responsibility at EY. Said the American, we do a lot in the sphere of corporate responsibility. And I said, what are you doing? We give money to charity. And in fact, this is the traditional approach of CSR. You're making profit, and then you give back to cancer research, to museums, to galleries, etc. But to me, the fundamental question is not, are you giving back? The key question is, how have you earned your profits? Because if you earned your profits in a non-sustainable way, by not taking into account environmental reasons, or energy efficiency, or human rights situation in third world countries, then giving back is not such a nice story. And this is a bit win to serve. You're doing this in a traditional way, and then suddenly you say, we're going to serve. And serve to win is the opposite. Then you start with, can we act in a responsible way as a company? And then you can be profitable. But then the other way around. I like that. So I like the wording, serve to win. But of course, there's a gap. You have new orientation in the role of businesses, but at the same moment, you have old practices, and we have to overcome those. This was my second block. Are we going? 5 minutes for the last block? Oh, that's your block. And the last block is about a bright future for the private seed sector. And it's about quality, and it's about food security, it's about sustainability, and also about serve to win. I'll come back to that a bit later. As far as I can see, in the world of today, everything what we've been talking about now, geopolitical tensions, but also the global agenda, geoeconomic fragmentation, the new view on capitalism, the new view on the role of corporations, is also very relevant for your sector, because you're confronted with these developments as well. I see your president, Marco van Leeuwen, very nodding. We know each other very well. And it's important to reflect on the world in which we're living, and we have to act. And there are positive elements, and I think positive is the SDG agenda. I think it's a uniting agenda that really helps society. I'm enthusiastic about the new views on capitalism, on the sort of market economies. I'm enthusiastic about new views on the role of the corporation, but at the same moment I'm concerned about old-fashioned thinking, about just the Anglo-Saxon short-termism, to put it that way. I'm concerned about the geopolitical difficulties and the difficulties with geoeconomic fragmentation. This is all what you can see now. And then I thought, what should be my message? And I asked Marco, I said, Marco, tell me something about things that are on your agenda. And they said, yeah, I'll give you information. And it is about global seed breeding and trade. It's about innovative and sustainable solutions. It's about ensuring quality seed access. It's about building resilient food systems. It's about creating a stable environment for innovation. It's about protecting innovations. And it's about engaging with stakeholders. So I'm supposed to talk about all those elements. I'm not able to do that. But in any case, and these are only the main things, because there are also a lot of bullets, so I received a lot of information. It's fantastic what you're doing. But in any case, it inspired me to reflect a bit on the question, what are things you can do? What about the main important elements? And I thought about 5 components could be very relevant. The first thing I would like to mention is be an active player for the common good. I'll explain why. There was a French Nobel Prize winner in economics, Jan Peter Balkenende, a highly respected economist, econometric, specialized. And when he received the Nobel Prize, people said, you should also write for a broader audience. And then he wrote a book with the title, Economics for the Common Good. And I like that because the common good means you are aware of everything that's happening around you, and what's your responsibility to that. And I think that also your sector can really be an important player for the common good. That's the first thing. Second element I would like to mention. It's so important that you underline constantly the essential elements of what you're doing. The seed sector. You're serving others, and in fact what you are doing is transcending the geopolitical difficulties and populists and nationalists and protectionism. Because what you're doing is in the interest of mankind. That's the reason why it's important, and underline that. Let me go back to last Saturday. I was in a meeting, conference in Belgium, in Antwerp, and it was also an award for Princess Margriet. And the Dutch know she is the sister of the former Queen of the Netherlands. And she received the award because she has been active for such a long time for the Red Cross. And then she gave a speech. And then she said the Red Cross is not choosing for countries or governments or whatever. The Red Cross is choosing for people. We are aware of all the difficulties and the tensions, but we are responsible for people, and we want to help them. And I think this is also a bit comparable with your situation. You want to help people. And you can talk about all the difficulties we have in the world, but it's so important to underline what you are doing. So underline that you are doing is in fact not for parties or whatever, it is for mankind. Third element, I would like to underline that has to do with continue to be a source of inspiration. Because if you are taking up your responsibilities, this is about a better world. It's about feeding people, it's about sustainability, it's all there. Is it easy? No, not always. And sometimes very complicated. And you also have vested interests. One of the books I like is Peter Diamandis, maybe you've heard about him. He was involved in the second flight to Mars. He is the founder, one of the founders of the Singularity University, and he has written a book about the question, what are the key issues of today? What are the key issues? Hunger, poverty, illiteracy, etc. And then he said, in fact, we do have the techniques, the technologies to cover all those issues. That's not the point. There are so many vested interests. And of course, it's a shame if you have new ideas and new views, and you can't realize them because of old-fashioned thinking. So that has to do with being a source of inspiration. That's the third element. The fourth element, I would like to call that analyze and communicate in an excellent way. Analyzing is key. I learned that when I was a young guy. I worked at the staff, at the thinking of my political party. And we have these study committees, and one of the committees was about economic growth, and was chaired by Jelle Zijlstra, a former Minister of Economic Affairs, Finance Minister, Prime Minister, long-time President of the Dutch Central Bank, and we'll reflect on economic growth. And I learned from him, before you talk about actions or solutions, whatever, first analyze. Analyze things in the right way. And I underline this because you are active in a sector that's essential to analyze what is happening geopolitically. What about trade measures and so on, trade barriers? And you can also describe the consequences if you are making the wrong choices, also on a global level. So my recommendation is constantly be active with analyzing things in the right way. And having said that, it's also important to communicate. Describe what you're doing. Describe what your views are. I think communication is essential if you want to do the right things. Communication is really key to bring forward the right solution, but also to convince others. Also invest in a stakeholder dialogue. And Marco, I've also understood that you said an organization like yours should also be societal-centric, not only product-centric or farmer-centric or whatever, but also societal-centric. And I think this is good, and communicate about that. You can contribute to a better world, improving quality of life for everyone. And then the last, the fifth element I would like to mention is serve to win. I mentioned that already. I was impressed by several remarks of Mahatma Gandhi, the famous Indian leader. And he once said, the best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others. I think it's a great remark. Serving others. And I think that's also the orientation that's key for your sector. Serving others just to get a better world. And that means, and that's a bit my story, what you see is we are living in a world with many challenges, but there's also hope for a better future. And if we are following the global agenda, the SDGs, if we are part of a new view on the organization of the economy, responsible capitalism, if we are choosing for values-based entrepreneurship, then you can change the world. And I wish you a lot of success with your activities. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Jan Peter Balkenende. What a great keynote you delivered here to us, with a lot of food for thought, a lot of recommendations for books, certainly also your own book, which is great, and I will show it later on to the audience. And now, and that's why I said 10 minutes, because then we had some time left for questions. I do have some, but I'm sure that the audience here, who has been listening very carefully, I have the impression, has questions, remarks, comments on what Jan Peter Balkenende has.
You were a great audience.
So, That's a compliment. Is there anybody who dares to speak first?
Otherwise, you start.
Shall I start? Yeah, I will. Because it is, if I understood you well, it is very much about leadership.
Yeah.
And you didn't mention the word leader nor leadership. But I would like you to emphasize a little bit more on that, because everything you do recommend us,
Yep.
and I listed it. Be active, be a player for the good, be there for the people,
Yep.
not for countries, not for companies, but it's people. Be a source of inspiration, make sure that you analyze properly and that you communicate, serve to win.
Yep.
That has all to do with the kind of human being you
Yep.
are, if
Yep.
that is what you feel, because it's about outcome, not output. Well, you gave us so much.
Yep.
But it seems as if we builded so many systems and constructions that in a way we cannot go sometimes back to just that normal human being, like we just want to be seen and
Yeah.
connected.
Yeah.
So what is modern leadership in these days?
Excellent question. And I'm happy that you talk about leadership and not about leaders.
No.
Because leaders, that's about focusing on an individual. And of course you have important leaders. I mentioned Mahatma Gandhi, I had the honor to meet Mandela. Of course they are political leaders, it's true. But for me it's more about leadership. And I like the wording servant leadership. Because of course you have to overcome difficulties. And of course you must be able to show results for your company, that's clear. Otherwise you cannot exist. But leadership in the true sense of the word means that you are able to connect your activities with the bigger picture. I attended a conference in 1991 here in the Netherlands, and it was about what's the responsibility. And then they said, usually we talk about functional responsibility. I'm responsible for my function, I have to do things in the right way. Okay? We said, no, it should be substantial responsibility, and it means that your activities are connected with the bigger picture. And I like these wordings. So leadership has to do with be aware of your own responsibility, but also never ignore the world around you and the bigger things you have to achieve. Yeah. And I like that. And that's a matter of inspiration. In our book, we do not talk about leaders, we talk about a multi-actor approach. We are so convinced that you need everyone to change the things.
Everyone on board.
But of course, let's say, if I see what some business leaders, you can see they are very relevant, you can inspire people, of course. But I think also these business leaders are more an example of the right leadership than just being an individual.
Yeah. Now, give us some background on the following, because when it comes about leadership and about long-term commitment and working for the good, serving to win, often people say this is what is happening more automatically, naturally in family-owned businesses. Mm-hmm. Yep. And in this global seed industry worldwide, there is a lot of family-owned yep. business.
That's true.
Now, apparently for a family-owned, it's not very complicated because you think about your children and your grandchildren and those after yep. you to come. So you have a longer vision, although for those who are serving the shareholders and not the complete set of yep. stakeholders, it's more difficult because once you have gone into that path of serving your stakeholders, shareholders, how do we get back to have an open view to our stakeholders? What is the?
Yeah, excellent question. Some years ago, we had a conference in the Netherlands about sustainable business practices. It was especially meant for SMEs. Mm-hmm. And 60% of SMEs were involved in sustainable issues. That was a result for SMEs, already 60%. But if you talk about family business, it was more than 90%. Mm. This says something about, let's say, thinking the long term. Yep. You can understand that and you can analyze it in the right way. There's one big issue that is we have to change things in the right way, and I'm a bit concerned about the fact we also see counter developments. In the United States, you see anti-ESG sentiments at this moment. Or companies, let's not talk about sustainability because it can lead to legal cases and so on. And you also here in the Netherlands, we see a legal case and so on. So we have to take into account the risk of polarization. The one important element is, are you able to show business models that are already working? Mm-hmm. It's always about changing the mindset and changing the mainstream. Yeah. And I'm absolutely convinced that those companies that are willing to change, that are sustainable companies, will be the winners in the long run. But we have to change things. And as long as we have still Anglo-Saxon components, yeah, you have difficulties. And this is a matter of take into account the long-term interests. And therefore, I like the family business because I've seen many of those, and they are really interested in those long-term views. You're right.
Yeah. Although we have great examples of
course.
non-family-owned businesses who are very sustainable as well. Now, you said you were concerned. I was at one point during your presentation surprised. Well, when you asked who has a global agenda,
Yeah.
you asked it in general, a very open question. And nobody said, I have, although we know in this very global-oriented world that a lot of people have global agendas for their own business, but then you said, a bit also surprised if I read you or not.
I can imagine,
said
if you only have a finger, I come to you, but what is it? Yeah, I can imagine that. That's,
No. Of course, that is exactly what you had done, I'm sure. But it is in a way so surprising because the Sustainable Development Goals, they are a set especially made to give us that world's global agenda.
Yeah.
But it's not immediately answered in that perspective.
Yeah.
So is that a reason to be concerned, or is this a company which is already one step beyond?
I've had experiences. Years and years ago, I was invited to speak at a conference in Singapore. 1,500 CEOs, a huge amount of people. And it was about the question, what do the SDGs mean for a country like Singapore?
Yeah.
I had experience in Japan. I knew several CEOs, and suddenly they had the pin of the SDG here on their jacket. Hey, why are you doing this? I was in Kenya. Also, a lot of young entrepreneurs, and you don't have to tell about it because they everything know about it. And I think it's so important that we are aware of the fact that we are united in having such a global agenda. Yeah. And I've seen that in the world of universities. For example, I attended a conference in Amsterdam for 70 business schools in Europe. And they were all busy with the question, how can we integrate sustainability into business models? Here in the Netherlands, all university applied sciences are obliged to have the SDGs in their curricula. And I've seen the creativity among students because the students first have to learn about SDGs, and then they got an assignment with a group of 9 or 10 students, deliver a proposal for a service or product that's in line with SDGs. And I've seen so much creativity. You can do it, but you must have the willingness to work it out.
Oh, this is also a plea to again wear the pin, maybe. A bit more than we
in my car now to the royal decoration. The king was here, so I have to...
Of course. Yeah. Now, questions, remarks from your side? Because Jan Peter, wonderful. I come and run to you and take the microphone, and then please tell us who you are. It was you, yeah. Please tell me who you are.
Thank you. My name is Shang Xu. I represent non-UC company in Taiwan. I got a quick question. So unfortunately, like many others, my company is a profit-driven company. I kind of wondering if there's any government body ever think about to provide a incentive package, so the company may guide it to guide the company to do its business through a higher moral standards. Thank you.
Aha. So the role of a government to make sure that industry moves towards the right sustainable direction.
It's an excellent remark, because also governments can play an important role in realizing the right behavior. For example, here in Europe, we have directives from the European Union. The Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, for example, it's an instrument that you are obliged to report about your sustainability practices. I think that's helpful. I also underline the fact that also a government can take up its role regarding the SDGs. It helps. You can also say the well-being economy. There's also a famous wording. What is the responsibility of the government? What about the business sector? What about the knowledge centers? So a government can do many things. And you have the tax instruments. So the governments can do a lot to bring forward those sustainable business practices. And of course, you have the tenders. That's a criteria you can use when you are inviting companies to deliver your product or service to the government. So there are a lot of instruments you can use, but it starts, your point is right, it starts with the conviction also of a government. Are we willing to realize SDGs, for example, or the Green Deal in Europe or whatever? You must have this conviction, and otherwise it won't help. Yeah. Right. I see also another question, that lady over there.
Ah, good.
Hi, thank you. My name is Emilie Tersteeg. I'm a PhD candidate at Wageningen University. And it's actually a nice follow-up question to the previous question, because in the Netherlands we see that we're likely moving towards a government that's not going to be very climate or SDG ambitious, cutting away development cooperation budgets and not setting more ambitious climate goals. Can you maybe reflect on how businesses are going to respond to this in your, from your perspective, and what you think in terms of self-regulation of businesses, whether that has a lot of potential?
I like this question. As I said, I'm also a lawyer. I did my PhD. You are a PhD candidate. I did my PhD in 1992. And it was also about this question, what about self-regulation and so on. So, but let's be honest, also in the last two cabinets, the SDGs were in the cabinet, in the coalition agreement, but not in the umbrella of the Prime Minister, Minister of Finance. No, it was on the umbrella of development cooperation. It was the wrong place. I think the government could have done more. And now we have to wait and see what this government will do. And your point is absolutely true. Whatever a government is doing, you have, as a company or university, your own responsibility. And I think you have to go on with sustainable business practices. There's not an alternative. So therefore, it requires also the creativity of the business sector. And maybe the business can be a leader, just to do the right things by being very concrete. And also, these are our intentions and we need this from your side. So I think you should have a kind of interaction, but you're completely right. Also the business sector, whatever government you will have, take up your own responsibility. And it's good that you're from Wageningen. The funny thing is, when I was Mr. Al Dijkhuizen was the former president of the university. When I was in Brazil or in Japan or in China, he always was there. And I noticed that my colleagues of EY always said, you haven't talked about Wageningen, because I'm enthusiastic about your university. So it's an honor for me that you are here. Great.
Great. Thank you. Yes, please, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm Dave Armstrong from the US by way of Japan, I guess. I'm impressed by your optimism, former Prime Minister. And it's coming up on an election in the United States that I won't go into the details of that, but I think you can understand the possible basis for my own pessimism.
This was clear already.
Yeah, so help me better understand the source of your optimism, maybe by telling me how I can tell my 22-year-old daughter to be as optimistic as the former Prime Minister of the Netherlands.
The question is a very good question. But the real issue is, am I optimistic or hopeful? And there's a difference between being optimistic and hopeful. I'm not so optimistic. And I will explain why. I told you I attended the conference in Antwerp, also Mark Eijsken was there, a former famous man. He has written 60 books, a former Prime Minister of Belgium, professor and so on, Minister of State. And he once said, an optimist is a badly informed pessimist. Because optimism has to do with a bit maybe denying reality and so on. Hopeful, that's the reason our book, the epilogue is towards an economics of hope. And hope means I'm real and honest in describing things happening, but hope means that there is a perspective you can try to achieve. Is it easy? No, it's not easy, that's true. But it is possible to reach. That's the reason why I prefer the word hopeful instead of being optimist. And I think it's important to be hopeful always. Because suppose you would say, oh my God, what's happening in the world, geopolitical tensions, geoeconomic fragmentation, the world is falling apart, has no use to do it. It's bad. Another book, Hannah Ritchie, Not the End of the World. It's a nice story to tell. She's a young climate researcher. And she said, when I was a student, I felt miserable. I thought, this is the end of my life. There's no future for the planet at all. And then she had one lecture of Hans Rosling, the famous author of the book Factfulness. And then she said, when I listened to Hans Rosling, then suddenly I discovered there's also hope, because you can achieve many things. That's the reason why I refer to what happened 200 years' time. Stephen Pink, Enlightenment Now, Hans Rosling. And when she heard that lecture, then she said, I have to think about climate change in a complete other way. What can we do? So her book is critical about several developments, but also she gives guidelines for the future. I think this is the best way, and there's also a matter of having hope. So maybe not directly optimistic, but hopeful.
Okay, then one book you would recommend his 22-year-old daughter.
Of course, Capitalism Reconnected. That's very clear. That's an easy
Now
one.
this is enough. This is enough.
Now, maybe if you have to ask me what are inspiring books, usually I refer
For
to...
a 22.
Yeah.
She is.
I would say,
Young student.
Do Why Nations Fail? Asmogel Robinson, two professors from the United States. It's a beautiful book, 3,000-year world history, 15 years of research, on one question, when can countries be successful and why not?
Yeah.
And the answer is very clear. One, you must be innovative. If you think things are going well and you're not willing to innovate, you can forget it. Two, you must have the rule of law, because it has no use to be profitable when there's corruption or a bad legal system. And three, and I underline that, you must have inclusive institutions, meaning that people must be able to share in the revenues of economic well-being. I think it's a fantastic book. Can recommend that.
Okay, great. Now, one final question maybe from somebody, because, yes, the lady here in the front, because in a couple of minutes you have to be in your car.
Yeah. Thank you.
Just remembering.
You understand the situation perfectly.
Yeah.
I am Anke van den Hurk from Plantem. I would like to know the whole role of fake news and how you see that, the facts and the figures. How are we going to deal with that in the future?
It's an excellent remark, and I'm really concerned. Let me go back to the time when I was Prime Minister. It was 2006, and I attended the Bilderberg conference, and you have the Dutch, but it was the international one, and it was in the neighborhood of Washington D.C. And that was one of the big techs, and I asked them, I can imagine you're so enthusiastic about the new possibilities, the world of internet, etc. But then I asked, but maybe there are also dark sides. You can also abuse internet. And he didn't understand my question. He was only busy with, let's say, positive thinking. If you talk about artificial intelligence and fake news, it's a big risk, because what is reality? And at this moment, you already can see that countries, I will not mention which one, but you know what I mean. They're already influencing, and that is happening. And it is terrible if people cannot rely on information, what is right and what is wrong. So that's the reason why I said, if you talk about the challenge of today, also on the national scale, you need each other. And therefore, I'm so concerned about what is happening in the world, because if also states are abusing AI for bad goals, then you get huge difficulties. And that's exactly what I meant when I was in the G20 meeting. There was another atmosphere, and that has changed. So we should do everything to prevent this situation. That also means that also the big techs, they have huge responsibilities to prevent these events. But you're completely right. So I'm on your line.
Yeah. Okay. It's not only states; it's also within states' political parties. It's everybody. Yeah. Delighted to have had you here as a keynote speaker. We're going to finish because of time. Thank you. You really gave us something to talk over, and we just started with this conference. You are leaving us, but we will continue work. So we will take all your good advices and your ideas, and we will try to challenge one another on the ideas you gave us, and we will read some of the books, maybe not all you recommended, but we'll do our best. And I would like to ask you to give him a very warm thank you. Jan Peter Balkenende, former Prime Minister, Minister of State of our beautiful country, the Netherlands. Thank you. Have a safe trip back.
Thank you.
And we continue the conference, so up to our next
and thank
program.
You for listening, and it was really an honor for me to be with you. So have a very nice conference, a very nice congress. Thank you so much.
Thank you.